Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll continue now with Romanism and the Reformation by H.Grattan Guiness. Yesterday, we concluded that there are two schools of thought. Two schools of prophetic interpretation, that of the Protestants called historicism, and that of the Catholics called futurism. Now, historicism interprets the prophecies to mean that the papacy is, was, and always will be, and always has been the Antichrist of the Bible, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the little horn, the Antichrist of the Bible. It is the papacy. The Roman Catholic Church, wishing to shed the onus of Antichrist away from the papacy and away from the Roman Catholic Church, interprets the prophecies from a futurist point of view. And that is placing the blame of Antichrist on a single individual that is to arrive within 7 years of the return of Christ, and that all those prophecies will be fulfilled by him in the future. Because the Protestant Reformation named the Pope as the man of sin, and the woman riding the scarlet-colored beast in Revelation chapter 17 is the Roman Catholic Church, the papacy launched the counter-reformation. And the counter-reformation was run by the Jesuit order. Now, with that thought in mind, we'll begin our reading with the first sentence at the bottom of page 269. If you're following along in your own copy of the book, and hopefully you've found this particular copy from which I am reading, so the pagination will be the same. But the last sentence on page 269 will begin our reading. Speaking about this counter-reformation, this Jesuit-led counter-reformation, this attempt to sell to the Christian world the futurist interpretation of Bible prophecy, so that God's people will abandon the truth, the historicist interpretation of the prophecies, and then ecumenically reunite with the Roman Catholic Church. That's what we have seen happen in the world. And it's because Protestants gave up their Protestant belief, accepted the Jesuit futurist interpretation of the prophecies, and now are in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. They no longer see the Pope as the Antichrist, the Roman Catholic Church as the whore riding the scarlet-colored beast. Okay, beginning the reading. It says, the futurist writings of Ribera and Bellarmine. Remember, these are the two most important Jesuit prognosticators from the Scriptures. He says, the futurist writings of Jesuit, Ribera, and Bellarmine were ably answered by Brightman, of whose work on the Apocalypse, published about the year 1600, this is a copy. In other words, H.Grattan Guiness has brought a copy of this work and is displaying it to the people listening to his lecture. He continues, he says, and they have been answered since his time in a succession of learned works, which I cannot stop to enumerate. For I desire to dwell upon another, and as I regard it, a more important phase of prophetic interpretation, marking the last 3 centuries, a phase not of a negative, but of a positive character. Protestant interpreters, remember historicists, have done more than answer the false futurism of the Church of Rome. They have built up the true historic interpretation of prophecy. They have built up a solid and symmetrical system a system which has developed slowly, which has progressed constantly, which has been born not of diligent investigation only, but of profound experience. A system whose truth has been sealed and demonstrated by its ever-growing correspondence with the actual course of events. True theology, like true science, is slow in development. The growth of astronomy, for example, has extended through 6,000 years. The system of Ptolemy was corrected by that of Copernicus. That of Copernicus was advanced by the laws of Kepler and the wonderful discoveries of Newton, and then further perfected by the Herschels and the many others in recent times. Keeping strictly to the prophecies related to Romanism and the Reformation, I will now endeavor to show you some of the analogous progress which has been made in their comprehension during the last 250 years. The following names represent a complete pillar of prophetic interpretation: Joseph Mead, Sir Isaac Newton, Giraud, Vitringa, Dabus, Fleming, de Chasseau, Bishop Newton, Faber, Cunningham, Keith, Bickersteth, Wordsworth, Eliot, and Burks. Their principal works are on this table, and I will now briefly trace the progress they exhibit in prophetic interpretation made in the last 250 years, 2.5 centuries. Joseph Mead was a fellow of Christ College in Cambridge and lived in the first half of the 17th century, the century immediately succeeding that of the Protestant Reformation. He was a man of great learning and diligence, and deep insight into the divine word, and made prophecy his special study. Dr. Tweesey, who was prolocutor in the Westminster Assembly of Divines, wrote a preface to Mead's work on the Apocalypse, in which he says that, quote, "As it is written of the virtuous woman in the Proverbs of Solomon, quote, many daughters have done virtuously, but thou surmountest them all," unquote. So it may be said of Mead's exposition of Revelation. Many interpreters have done excellently, but he surmounteth them all, unquote. Mead's Key to the Apocalypse, written in Latin, was translated into English by Richard More, one of the burgesses in the English Parliament, and the House of Commons published that translation in 1641, the year of the great massacre of Protestants in Ireland. Here is a copy of that work published by the House of Commons. The Puritan Parliament set its seal thus upon the historical anti-papal interpretation of prophecy, and upon this valuable work of Joseph Mead. Mead did what no interpreter had previously done. He laid down the important principle that for the correct understanding of the Apocalypse, it is necessary in the first place to fix the order of its principal visions apart altogether from the question of their interpretation. Accordingly, Mead sought to exhibit the synchronism and the succession of these visions, or the order of the prophecies contained in the Apocalypse. Setting aside and ignoring setting aside and ignoring for the time all question of the meaning of these prophecies, he endeavored to demonstrate from the visions themselves the position they occupy with reference to one another. Their mutual relations, once proved, served as a most valuable clue to their significance. Mead prefaced his work with the prayer, quote, "Thou who sittest upon the throne, and thou, O Lamb, root of David, who wast only worthy to take and open this book, open the eyes of thy servant, and direct his hand and mind, that in these thy mysteries he may discern and produce something which may tend to the glory of thy name and profit of the church." Unquote. The first synchronism which Mead establishes is that of what he calls a, quote, "noble quaternion of prophecies," unquote, remarkable by reason of the equality of their times. First, of the woman remaining in the wilderness for 3.5 times, or as it is declared in prophecy, 1,260 days. Second, of the beast whose deadly wound was healed, ruling 42 months. Third, of the outer court of the temple trodden underfoot by the Gentiles for the same number of months. Fourth, of the witnesses prophesying in sackcloth 1,260 days. Mead points out that not only are these times equal, but they begin at the same time and end together, and must therefore synchronize throughout their course. The events of the last 250 years have confirmed Mead's interpretation as to the general synchronism of these times, but they have also shown that these periods should be reckoned from an era rather than from a point of time, and that they terminate in a corresponding era. The 3.5 times of prophecy date from the era of the rise of the papal and Mohammedan powers, and extend to the era of the overthrow of those powers, in which era we are living in at the present day. Let me refer you to a work on this subject which I published a year ago entitled "Light for the Last Days," tracing these prophetic times and the eras of their commencement and close. Mead established several other synchronisms, as, for example, one between the revived Roman head of Revelation 13 and the two-horned lamb-like beast which John calls elsewhere the false prophet, which acts for the revived head. He shows that the two are inseparable companions, that they are together alike in their rising and in their ruin, that the one exercises the power of the other, and thus, whatever be their meaning, that they are necessarily synchronous. He then traces the position of the remaining visions of the apocalypse as they stand related to these, showing which precede these central visions, which synchronize with them, and which succeed them, thus making out and establishing the connection and order of the entire series of visions. And this, as I've already stated, apart from all question of interpretation. Having gone through the book of Revelation thus, Mead next proceeds to expound and demonstrate its fulfillment in the events of history. I have said that Mead's work on Revelation was approved and printed by the Puritan Parliament. Just at that time, the Westminster Assembly of Divines drew up its most venerable and valuable Confession of Faith, a profession subsequently accepted by the National Presbyterian Church of Scotland. Here is a copy containing a list of the 100 Puritan divines who met in the Westminster Assembly, headed by the name of Dr. William Trissy, the prolocutor who wrote the preface to Mead's work to